Yesterday, I wrote a line on my post that said, "Weak men destroy society just as much as stupid ones." And honestly, no one explained this better than that ill-mustached man, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche observed that modern morality has been flipped upside down. The meek, the humble, and the common man are now called good, while strength, power, and nobility are labeled evil. In this twisted moral world, weakness isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated. And I think it's time we talk about this, because everywhere I look, and if I'm honest, even inside myself, I see nothing but weakness and self-deception. So let's get into it. There's a powerful moment in the death of Stalin. The once mighty chiefs of police are being executed one by one, and in the middle of it all stands Malenkov, confused, trembling, unsure of what to do, as he was kind of a pushover. At one point, a commander turns to another and asks, "Can we trust Malenkov?" The other replies coldly, "Can we ever trust a weak man?" That line cuts deep, because it's true. Weakness is not harmless. It's unpredictable, dishonest, and dangerous. A weak man doesn't betray you out of malice. He betrays you because he lacks the strength to stand for anything. Nietzsche understood this better than anyone. He insisted that weakness is not neutral. It's harmful. Modern culture often shrugs it off as a personality flaw, something we can forgive or excuse. But for Nietzsche, weakness was a kind of moral disease. Those who cannot assert themselves grow resentful of those who can. We see it everywhere. In politics, in workplaces, even in our own reflections. When someone can't reach a goal, they dismiss it as worthless. Sour grapes, as the old saying goes. That is the seed of resentment Nietzsche warned about, the quiet hatred of the strong by those who cannot rise above their own limitations. To Nietzsche, this resentment breeds a false morality. The weak man convinces himself that his failures are actually virtues, that his inability to act makes him kind, that his fear makes him humble, and his envy moral. In truth, it's self-deception dressed up as goodness. Dostoevsky captured this perfectly in White Nights. The narrator, a timid dreamer, wins the love of a girl, only to lose her when her true lover returns. He writes her a letter, blessing her happiness, claiming he feels no bitterness. It sounds noble, but Nietzsche would have seen through it. The man is not free from resentment. He's simply hiding it behind moral pride. He tells himself he's better because he's forgiven her, when really he's too weak to face his pain. That's the tragedy of weakness. It disguises itself as virtue. The weak cannot act, so they sanctify their inaction. They cannot love without fear, so they call detachment peace. They cannot win, so they call victory evil. And this is why Nietzsche despised weakness. Not because he loved cruelty, but because he hated dishonesty, especially the kind that hides behind fake goodness. Weakness poisons societies from within. It makes people resentful, moralizing, and self-righteous. They don't overcome their suffering. They build a moral system around it. And there is a kind of evil that's hidden in weak people too, which I'm going to discuss now. There's a haunting relationship story by Dostoevsky called The Meek One. It's the tale of a middle-aged pawnbroker who marries a poor young woman. At first, it seems like a story of compassion. He pays off her debts, gives her more money for her pawned items than they're worth, and showers her with attention. On the surface, it looks like kindness. But look closer. Nietzsche would say it's manipulation disguised as pity. The pawnbroker doesn't help her out of love. He helps her because it makes him feel powerful. Her dependence feeds his ego. He likes being the one who saves her. What seems like generosity is actually control. As the marriage continues, the darker side of this weakness reveals itself. When his wife visits another man, he reacts not with strength or understanding, but with obsession. He arms himself with a revolver, storms in, and later even boasts that he conquered her with his readiness to accept death. He turns his own humiliation into a form of domination, using emotional blackmail to make her feel guilty, to make her stay. Nietzsche would have called this the weak man's true face, cruelty born from self-pity, because weak people, he believed, often manipulate others. They use guilt, pity, and dependency as weapons. They say things like, "I've sacrificed so much for you," or, "After everything I've done, you owe me." It's not love, it's control through sympathy. The weak person plays the victim not to be healed, but to hold power over others. They feed on the compassion of those around them, creating a moral debt they can later exploit. A truly strong person doesn't need to manipulate anyone. Their strength speaks for itself. But the weak crave control, and because they cannot earn it through action or courage, they achieve it through emotional blackmail, guilt, or moral posturing. In the story, the pawnbroker's twisted pity finally destroys the woman he claims to love. She ends her life, and he comforts himself with the thought that her death somehow proves his devotion. Nietzsche would see this not as tragedy alone, but as revelation. The weak man's pity was never pure. It was always self-serving. This is what Nietzsche called slave morality, the morality of the weak. Those who have read Crime and Punishment, they must know about Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov believes he's destined for greatness. He imagines himself as an Übermensch, a superior man beyond ordinary morals. To prove it, he commits a carefully planned murder, convinced it will mark his transformation into something extraordinary. But the moment it's done, everything begins to fall apart. The superior man becomes confused, paranoid, and disgusted with himself. His revolutionary dream collapses. Nietzsche later observed that Raskolnikov had also killed a part of himself. What dies in that moment isn't just morality, it's meaning. Raskolnikov wanted to transcend weakness, but in truth, his will wasn't strong enough to bear the weight of his own ideas. Beneath his intellect and pride lay a fragile soul. Once the illusion of purpose shattered, he fell into despair. Nietzsche saw Raskolnikov as a tragic warning, the weak man who tries to be extraordinary and fails. He admired the courage to challenge conventions, but he also understood that without inner strength and clarity, rebellion collapses into confusion. Raskolnikov's act was bold, but his spirit was soft, and so he broke. When his self-created mission crumbled, he had nothing left to live for. No values, no purpose, no faith in himself. That is what Nietzsche called passive nihilism. A passive nihilist, he said, is characterized by a weak will, by the inability to create meaning, and by the tendency to withdraw from the world. Instead of forging new values, the weak man collapses under the weight of old ones. Raskolnikov turns inward, condemning himself and seeking refuge in guilt and religion, not out of strength, but out of exhaustion. Nietzsche saw this pattern everywhere. Kings, thinkers, leaders, anyone who lacks discipline and strength of will eventually fall the same way. Even those born into privilege or power can lose everything if they have no inner foundation. When they fail, they don't rebuild, they decay. Their loss of meaning becomes nihilism, because that's what nihilism really is, the confession of weakness. The weak man drifts through life without conviction. He never commits to anything fully, not to ideals, not to community, not even to himself. So when obstacles appear, he gives up. His inner voice says, "Nothing matters." But what really means nothing is himself. Nietzsche believed that a life without a strong purpose inevitably turns hollow. Without the will to power, that inner drive to create, to affirm, to rise, the weak cannot build meaning. So they retreat into despair, cynicism, or self-pity. That's the true mark of nihilism. The strong, by contrast, respond differently. When their old beliefs collapse, they don't sink. They rebuild. Nietzsche called this the path of the active nihilist, the one who, after the death of old idols, bravely forges ahead and freely creates their own values and meaning. But the weak cannot do that. They crumble. They cling to old dogmas, to guilt, to self-deception. Without strength of will, meaning dies. And when meaning dies, all that's left is despair. And finding meaning in life has not been made easy by the ancient philosophies that Nietzsche hated so much. This section contains some points I don't personally agree with, and you don't have to either just because Nietzsche said them. Anyway, let's discuss it. Nietzsche believed that weakness doesn't just live inside individuals, it's also built into our philosophies. He traced the roots of modern weakness back to certain life-denying ways of thinking. In his view, some of history's most celebrated thinkers, like Socrates and the Stoics, didn't actually celebrate life. They resented it. They preached reason, virtue, and calmness. But Nietzsche saw those very ideals as symptoms of decay. He opens Twilight of the Idols by calling Socrates ugly, not only in body but in spirit. Nietzsche's real objection wasn't about appearance, or maybe it was, but it was more about what Socrates represented, the triumph of reason over instinct. Socrates taught that reason equals virtue equals happiness. A neat little formula that, for Nietzsche, was nothing less than an attack on life itself. He writes, "To have to combat one's instincts is the formula for decadence." In other words, when you start fighting against your natural drives, your hunger, your ambition, your passions, you're already weakening yourself. Nietzsche saw this as weakness disguised as wisdom. Socrates, in his eyes, turned life into an illness. Even in his final moments, Nietzsche says, Socrates looked back at life as an illness. That single image captures the heart of Nietzsche's complaint. Instead of affirming life with all its chaos, Socrates treated it like something to be cured. The Stoics, too, fell under Nietzsche's fire. They preached calm acceptance and emotional control. But to Nietzsche, this was just another form of denial. Stoicism's obsession with suppressing desire and mastering emotion, he argued, leads to a life-denying stance. By telling people to accept fate and repress passion, Stoicism restrains the very forces that make us alive: creativity, strength, vitality. It's a philosophy that teaches resignation, not transformation. Nietzsche saw it as another version of slave morality, virtue through surrender. He demanded something very different: Amor Fati, the love of one's fate. Not cold endurance, but joyful acceptance. Don't suppress life, he said. Embrace it. Nietzsche took this personally. He accused Socrates of paving the road for both Christianity and modern science, systems he called metaphysical monsters because they placed ideas above life. For him, Socratic rationalism and Stoic discipline robbed humanity of its will, its passion, and its joy. Nietzsche lumped Socrates and the Stoics together as the original architects of weak philosophy. He imagined a student asking his master why he seems so content, and the master replies by listing everything he's learned, as if knowledge could replace living. Nietzsche retorts, "I have dreaded life with all its success and all my scorn." To him, the Stoics' calm wasn't strength, it was resignation, dressed in intellect. Nietzsche rejected these philosophers by saying, "Life is not to be understood, it is to be loved, lived, embraced." That's the lesson of Amor Fati, the full acceptance of existence, the joy of saying yes even to suffering.